Let's talk about the U.S. military's M18 service pistol, which is made by Sig Sauer. That's exactly what I have in my hand right here. And this is in fact a military correct pistol when it comes to the pistol aiming laser, as well as the red dot optic on top. And we're going to talk about the details and specifications of each of these components in order to give you an idea as to what the U.S. military is providing our troops with at this point in time. And we're going to talk about some things that just don't make a lot of sense to me, maybe just because I'm a civilian or just someone who shoots a lot, but there's some things about this that I don't like. And that's saying a lot coming from a guy who really enjoys his SIG products. So let's talk about the details and everything first. And before we move forward, I do need to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. And of course, they have everything you need when it comes to support for your Sig Sauer P320s and everything else related to that. So big thanks to them for helping me out. But honestly, when it comes to this military stuff, most of this stuff is hard to acquire or overly expensive for no reason. So it is what it is, but let's get into the details and then we'll talk about why a lot of this might not make sense and why I'm not exactly sure what they were trying to accomplish with some of these components. Here's the M18 up close, and as you can see, it actually lacks any designations of being a P320. It only says M18, and then it has the military inventory codes right here on the slide. So that designates this pistol as a military contract pistol. And you can find these for around $800 through auction sites, but they're not overly available to the public. So just keep that in mind. But this is the designated sidearm of the Air Force and the Marines. It's got a 3.9-inch barrel and it's chambered in 9mm Luger. But there are some differences with this pistol compared to what we as civilians generally have access to. So real quick, we'll go ahead and unload it. You get a 17-round flush fit magazine. It's got the Coyote tan base plate there. And you also get two 21-round extended mags as well. And this pistol is empty and safe. And then of course you have the manual safety, which you get on all the M17 or M18 models. Big differences here, though, compared to the civilian version. So, real quick, in order to talk about that, let's take apart the slide, okay? Or field strip it at least. All right, so one of the major differences is that they use the Sig Lock optics mounting system. And what that means is that under the striker assembly here, there's a single threaded screw hole which holds in the optic, versus what you get with the civilian version, which is two screw holes that you actually mount from the top. So this is a completely different system. It's the Sig Lock system, and according to Sig, it's extremely strong, robust, and made for military duty, which means, at least in their opinion, it's better than what we get from the civilian models. So just keep that in mind, but this Sig Lock system is why the Romeo-M17 you see mounted here is only available for military-compatible M17s or M18s. Now, another difference is actually that the extractor spring pin here that lets you remove the rear slide cap requires a Torx wrench in order to be removed. So that is a big difference, just something that you would have to keep in mind. On a standard civilian version, you can actually just remove it by pushing down on the plunger and then sliding the slide cap off. So those are all considerations to make. It also has a heavier recoil spring assembly. And that's because these guns are designed to shoot mostly 9mm NATO or higher pressure rounds like 124 grain plus P. So it has a longer service life by being a heavier spring, but it is in fact a slightly heavier spring. And I'll go ahead and show you that right now just so you can kind of see how that works. So now the reason you can tell is because if I ride the slide home, you won't get everything back into battery. So just kind of watch how this works. And you can see now, well, that time it didn't do it because that's just how these things always go, right? But you can see how I'm slightly out of battery there, and that's because of this heavy recoil spring, which I didn't have this issue with civilian versions of the P320, but I definitely have it with this recoil spring assembly. So not an issue if you just let it rip, but it is something that I noticed, and it's possible that lighter loading 9mm rounds might not actually do the trick when it comes to cycling reliably. So keep that in mind. And then the only other real difference is that the rear sight assembly here has slightly smaller ears in the sense of front to back compared to the civilian version. And of course, that's another reason why the M17 optic here is only compatible with the military contract pistol. So this is kind of the main differences of the M18 versus the P320 M18. And I'll go ahead and move on to the next part of this equation, which is the LMD PAiL right here. All right, let's talk about the LMD PAiL, or the LaserMaxDefense Pistol Aiming Laser, or the LMD PE IR-1, which has a $349 MSRP, But that's only for law enforcement or military, and us pesky civilians are at the mercy of the secondary market where these things are running anywhere between $400 or $800. So keep that in mind. It's probably not worth it unless you really want a clone correct M17 or M18. Now, this was the laser aiming module chosen by the US Army for their pistol aiming laser program. It has an entire polymer housing, which seems robust, but it is polymer. It's glass reinforced nylon. And then it uses a 175 lumen white light, which isn't very bright. I mean, it's bright enough for like a dark room, but it's not going to defeat lights like headlights or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. It has the basic component of a white light, but just not a very good one. And then it also has an IR illuminator, which is 175 milliwatts, and then it has a 0.7 milliwatt IR laser. And of course, this is definitely more geared towards night vision. You know, since we're talking about night vision anyway, I do want to mention that Nightline Inc. is a huge supporter of the channel. If you go to nightline-inc.com and order night vision through them, which you'll have to call in for in order to guarantee you're getting what you need, just mention Magic Prepper and they'll give you 15% off of your order. And that's pretty huge when it comes to night vision devices, as we all know. So if you want to get great night vision, hit up Nightline Inc. Tell them Magic Prepper sent you, get that hookup, and get out on the range and actually train under knots. Because without that, I want to be able to tell you what I really think about this pistol. And you can see where the illuminator is right here, and then you have the laser in the center of the laser aiming module in order to be in line with the bore of the pistol. So this thing is definitely more geared to be using the IR versus the white light, which is why the white light takes a back seat and has such a low lumen output. It uses one CR123 battery with a 2-hour battery life. Now, that's actually inside the part of the housing right here. And you can see everything is screwed together with flathead screws. Even the mounting portion that mounts it to the rail of the pistol is a flathead. So this thing is really robust, but it also has a lot of interesting snag points and stuff like that because of that robustness. So let's go ahead and open this up so you can see that you can actually replace the battery without removing the LMD PAiL, which is nice for keeping your zero. But this thing is very bulky considering it only uses one CR123. Whereas for the same amount of width and height that this thing has, you can probably say that an X300 or a TLR1 is actually smaller until you get to the bezel. So there we go. There's your CR123, and you can see this O-ring right here. It actually keeps this thing relatively waterproof, actually down to 1 meter for 30 minutes. So that's pretty good, and you can see, I mean, this thing is robust, and they've thought it pretty well through in order to keep it very durable. And it also has a flat bottom here so that you can rest the pistol on something in order to have, I don't know, something to shoot off to be more accurate with. I'm not sure how applicable that really is to real life, but that's something that they advertise. And then it's got the buttons on the sides, which we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but it does the basic job of activating the light and the IR, and I'll show you that here in just a second. So as you can see, we have a light on both, or a button on both sides, so you have ambidextrous controls. And then, as usual, you hold it to get momentary, and then you tap it in order to have constant on. So it does the job. They're not the best, but they do work, okay? And then you also have your 3 modes. So you have white light, then you have red in the center is dead, so this shuts off the unit completely, which I do like in the sense of trying to avoid any negligent light discharges or anything like that. You don't have to worry about that with this if you do have it in off mode, so that is a plus. And then you have your IR mode, which is the IR illuminator and laser in tandem. You cannot separate them. These are the only 3 modes you have. So that's the LMD PAiL close-up. Now let's talk about the Romeo-M17. The Romeo-M17, according to Sig anyway, is the best pistol red dot on the planet, and it sure better be with an MSRP of over $800. And that is really expensive, especially when we're talking about other similar optics like the Aimpoint Acro P2 being $200 or $300 less at times. I mean, that's asking a lot. So the M17 has a NATO stock number from the Army, which means that this optic could possibly be in military use. I'm not 100% sure of whether or not it is yet, but I do know that they have the stock number, which means it can be used by the US military at this point in time. It uses the Sig lock mounting system that we discussed before, which means this is only able to be used on military M18s or M17s. So another thing to consider. But durability-wise, it should be rather durable. It has a 7075 aluminum housing, and you can kind of see by the design angles and the way this thing was engineered that it looks very robust. And it definitely shrouds and protects the glass in a way that you would expect from a military duty grade optic. But in all reality, I'm not the guy who throws $800 optics on the ground, so I don't know that for sure, but that is something that they advertise as it being the most durable pistol dot on the market. And you can see the designs tend to lead you to believe that. Now, it's a fully enclosed emitter that's purged, so you don't have to worry about anything environmental getting into the emitter and screwing up your sight picture. And it's also assembled in the USA. Now, that doesn't quite mean the same as made in the USA, but it is better than some of their other optics, which are just purely made in China. So I'll give them credit for that. And then it integrates with the factory sights. They have a very low deck height. As you can see, okay, these sights line up perfectly inside the window, even though these are the factory height sights. These are not suppressor height sights or anything along those lines. So real quick to kind of demonstrate that here for you, I'm going to go ahead and get this sight picture. And you can see how the red dot just sits there right on top of that front sight post when the sights are lined up. And then of course we'll go back to where you can see just how low these sights sit inside of the window while still being visible. So that part is pretty cool, and those of course are night sights. And then we have a couple of different reticle options. We have a 2 MOA dot, a 32 MOA circle dot, or just the circle. Now, I generally just use the 2 MOA dot because I'm just getting used to only shooting red dots, but I could see how the circles might be helpful, especially the open circle, if you were just trying to get on target fast and unload without maintaining a really high level of accuracy. But honestly, I think the 2 MOA dot is really all you need. And then it's got a side-loading CR2032, which you can see right here. Now, some people think that might be obtrusive when it comes to, I don't know, concealed carry or something like that. But in all honesty, I think it's just fine. It doesn't really add any bulk to the side of the pistol. And I like that I don't have to remove the optic in order to replace the battery. So I'm good with it. And that battery should give you about 20,000 hours of battery life on a medium setting. And based on the settings, you've got 15 to choose from, and 3 of them are night vision. So that's pretty intense. Now, this particular optic was built with the idea of night vision use in mind, and it uses their dark technology, which is basically reticles and coatings that are optimized for Gen 3 plus night vision, which is why it has a very blue tint. And I'm sure you can see just how blue that tint is, but it is substantially blue. In fact, this optic might have more of a blue tint to it than my RMR, which is saying quite a bit because the RMR is very blue. This thing might even be bluer than that. In fact, I'm just going to say it is. So just keep that in mind. And then it is a motion activated optic, which means that it shuts off when this pistol is not in motion. And the second you pick it up or it gets jostled or moved around, it turns on, which is how it saves battery life, which is how it can have a 20,000 hour battery life. And just real quick to mention that, some of the literature I've seen around this optic says 50,000 hours of battery life, but on SIG's website, on the specifications, it actually says 20,000. So I'm gonna go with the lower of the two because that's probably the more accurate one. But that's the M17 up close. Is it a good optic? I mean, yeah, and in daylight conditions and everything else, like I really enjoy it. It seems very robust. Like I said, I'm not the guy to try to throw it around. You can see that the controls are very easy to access. And they're recessed, and there's actually like a little housing around them. And what's nice about that is that you can feel this at night to know which button you need to press in case you do need to make adjustments. But it is protected so that these don't get inadvertently activated when you're carrying the pistol in a holster or something like that. So this has been good as well, although the buttons are kind of small, and I have noticed that when wearing gloves, they can be a little bit hard to activate. So just mentioning that, the way you actually zero this thing is relatively easy. You have your windage right here on the side and then your elevation in this area right here. And they work just fine. They have positive clicks and everything is zeroed very easily. So this is the M17 close up. Now that you've seen everything close up and gotten all the details out of the way, let's talk about why I probably have some issues with this entire package. Okay, I really wanted to love this pistol configuration. I really wanted to love this gun because I'm a Sig Sauer fan. I really am. I know that could be problematic for some of you, but it's just true. I like a lot of their products and I like innovation. I like moving forward, so I can appreciate that. And I thought by compiling the military's top tier sidearm with all the components that they're supposedly using would leave me with something that I felt could be a do-all, get-it-done type pistol. And unfortunately, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And we're gonna talk about that right now. So first off, the military version of the M18 is a cool gun for a lot of obvious reasons. It just has the cool factor to it and everything else. But It's also better than the civilian version of the P320 or even the civilian M18. And that sort of bothers me just because why is it better? Why aren't all P320s built with the same components and parts and everything else related to what's in the military version of the M18? This has a stronger recoil spring, which could be problematic with weak sauce range ammo, but is going to give you a longer service life. Has a stronger optics mounting system, which lets you integrate your factory sights, so you don't have to worry about that being an issue if you want to have a co-witness. Everything about it's just slightly more robust or just slightly better. And they even advertise the SigLock mounting system as being stronger and better than any other mounting system. So why is that not something that the civilian market has access to just the same? So that's an issue for me. And yeah, this gun is cool, and I think that it might be in some ways better than a typical civilian M18, but I shouldn't have had to gone out of my way to get it, right? So that's just something that I wanted to throw out there. Now, let's talk about the pistol aiming laser, the LMD PAiL LaserMaxDefense Pistol Aiming Laser, right? Okay, so first off, the white light is weak. 175 lumens, okay, maybe if the candela was super high, that could be all right, but in reality, it's just bright enough to light up a room. Yeah, it has a decently focused beam, but it's just not very good as a white light, especially for the size of this thing. So the white light was an afterthought. They said, oh, we should probably have a flashlight on this pistol too, so let's just throw one in that same unit and see what we can do regarding the amount of power we can output, right? So 175 lumens, not great. The biggest thing I don't like about this thing, okay, and just so you can see, like, let's white light you real quick, you know? I mean, that's like barely any action at all. Nobody's upset about that, right? So, and yeah, I know it's daytime, but come on. Either way, 175 lumens, okay, I can get by, but it's not like making me feel good about the light that I'm carrying around. Second off, the switches are buttons. Yeah, they're rubberized, they have texture, so you can get to them if need be. But they're hard to activate. They're not intuitive, and you have to really make sure you're on top of it if you want to activate it. And they're just hard to activate, especially when it's wet. And I was out shooting this gun under nods in the middle of a rainstorm, and I was slipping off these buttons all the time because they were wet and they weren't intuitive, so I was missing the activation quite a bit. And honestly, that's not something you want to be able to have to worry about, right? I don't want to deal with the fact that something won't work very well if it gets wet, especially when it's made specifically for the military. You would assume that these things would be really easy to activate even under wet conditions, and in fact I found them to be pretty difficult, especially in comparison to something like a TLR7, which is meant for like concealed carry. So the switches just aren't good. I don't think they did a good job with that. Just my opinion. I also don't like that when you have your IR switched on, right, old green mode there, that it's all or nothing. It's laser and illuminator or nothing. So, you know, right now you can get both or you get nothing. So you don't have the option to only use a laser in an environment where maybe an illuminator is not necessary, or you don't want to have that big of a splash of light coming out of the end of your pistol. And you also don't get an option to only use the illuminator in conjunction with your red dot, so that way you don't have like a secondary aiming reticle or device in front of your eyes in order to confuse you when you're trying to aim. So in all honesty, I'd like to be able to switch them both on separately. I understand the limitations on the size of the housing and everything else when it comes to the switchology of it, which I'm not even sure if that's a real word, but I think Hop invented that, so good job, Hop. Anyway, that's just my thought process there. I think it's very limiting because of having to have the IR illuminator and laser on simultaneously. And the other thing is that this thing is just gigantic. The housing is massive. It's huge, okay? I don't like it because it's just so big, and it only takes one CR123 battery, but it's still massive. And because it's so massive, it gets snagged on things, and it's just overly big for what feels like no reason. So that's my thoughts on the LMD PAiL. Oh, don't forget how expensive it is to acquire one because they're secondary market only. All right, now, does it do the base job of having a white light, an IR illuminator, and an IR laser on a pistol? Yes, it does. Are those things that important? I don't know. So let's move on to the optic. The Romeo-M17. Of course, the sun comes out now at an angle I don't prefer. That's how filming always works out, but hey, welcome to YouTube, right? The Romeo-M17. I mean, this thing is very cool, don't get me wrong. And I like shooting it, especially in daylight conditions. I like the fact that it feels very durable. I assume it's durable. Like I said, I'm not throwing it on steel plates just to find out. I'll leave that to focus trip. But in all reality, the focus was on night vision use. You can tell. The blue filter on the optic is extremely blue. The glass is just blue. It's more blue than an RMR, which is already very blue. So that's okay because I understand why. And it's still usable under daylight conditions. So that doesn't really deter me, but it is something to be aware of. It's extremely blue. But the focus is on night vision, which is why it's so blue. And unfortunately, the whole night vision concept here doesn't really work the way you want it to. And I'll tell you why. So you have your integrated sights, which very cool, right? Oh, look at that, low profile. You get a co-witness. It builds right into the housing of the optic. Awesome. Except for the sights are night sights. And once you put on night vision and you try to look through an optic with night sights there, everything becomes very convoluted because the night sights are extremely bright under night vision. And now I have these night sights competing with my reticle, and it just creates a very messy sight picture. This is why on my Glock, where I have an Acro P2, I have blacked out suppressor height sights. They're only there as backup sights in case the optic goes down, but they don't interfere with night vision use at all while using the reticle of the optic. It's nice to have the backup sights. I appreciate that, but under night vision, which is what this optic was specifically focused on, it makes everything more difficult to see. Now, here's an interesting point. You can actually remedy that by using the PAiL. If you use the IR illuminator with the PAiL, you can see the reticle much more clearly, which is great. Except for the fact that now I don't need it because I have the illuminator, which means I'm now active. So passive aiming's out the window and everybody in, a 10-mile radius can see me if they're using night vision. But the other side of it is that I also have the laser, which is simultaneously activated with the illuminator, which means I don't need the reticle anymore because now I've moved on to active aiming. So yes, everything looks great if the illuminator's on, but then you don't need the reticle. So it just feels like these systems weren't very well thought out in tandem because yes, I like having co-witness sights. I like having redundancy, but I don't like competing with night sights to see my reticle while using night vision on an optic that was specifically designed to be highly capable with night vision at an $800 price point. Look, I'm just some dude. I'm not in the military. I don't know if they have their reasons, but like this is my experience with this setup of like what the military considers to be like the best of the best pistol aiming laser and the best optic and the best pistol, right? Which as a prepper, I'm like, those are things I'm curious about because, military logistics, everything else related to it and testing and durability and all that stuff, of course, okay? That's why I'm bringing this to your attention because clearly, they don't always make the best choices, at least in my experience, and at least from what I've heard from a lot of the military community. So that's my issue with the M17. Everything else about it's awesome. It's a great optic. I really like it. But it's just like the purpose it was made for just doesn't make a lot of sense with the way it was designed. It's like the people who are like, yeah, we want to be able to keep the sights and we want to be able to have a really like bright reticle and have all these settings. And then the guys who are over there worried about night vision, we're like, well, you better be able to see it under nods. You better make it really blue and have a lot of settings, and then they forgot about the part where they jammed a bunch of night sights in there to occlude your window. Now, here's another thing I don't like about this setup. And this one's a little bit more based on logistics, but holsters. How many holsters do you think work with this LMD PAiL massive Jabba the Hutt size optic / lighting system? Because it's not an optic, but hey, what do I know? Only one. Safariland makes it, and they have a nice ALS style holster. It's actually a level 3 holster that will accommodate the PAiL on an M17 or an M18, which is great because I like Safariland. That's cool. There's a couple problems here though. First off, you only have the one option. Second off, it doesn't accommodate red dots, which I found to be interesting because from the beginning of the MHS, right, the handgun program where the military chose the M18 and the M17, from the beginning, this pistol was always designed with the concept of having an optic in mind. Hence why the optic mount is integrated into the rear sights. They wanted optics capability into the future. It was just part of the original design. But they made this one holster that works with the laser aiming, or the pistol laser aiming, the pistol aiming laser, whatever it is, I don't care anymore. They made one holster for this thing, and it won't work with an optic. So look, you can get them used. You can't buy them direct because, like everything else here, very hard to get a hold of, very expensive. Not sold to civilians, so only secondary market. Same with the holster, not sold to civilians, only secondary market. So it's like $180 for a holster that shouldn't be that much. And you would have to modify it if you want it to work with the optic, which was specifically designed for this military handgun. Okay, so each system was developed separately without referencing the other concepts. That's what it feels like to me. So individually, each component is pretty good. The PAiL is probably my least favorite because of the controls and the output levels and the size. It's just, I like the robustness, I like the durability aspect, I like what it brings to the table and giving you options. But I don't necessarily think it's better than like a Streamlight VIR, right? Or whatever it is, a TLR VIR, or whatever their vampire light is. I don't think it's probably better than that. And that's cheaper in the sense of buying it brand new versus on a secondary market, right? So it's probably my least favorite part, but in general, each component is good. I mean, it does what it's supposed to do. It does what it was designed to do. It doesn't just not work sometimes, right? The M17 is a really nice optic. It's really good. It's just that what it was purposely designed for, in the sense of focusing on night vision, didn't make a lot of sense when you add all the other components together, especially the night sights that include the sight picture. And then you also have the PAiL, which helps fix that problem, but then doesn't allow you to not use the laser, which means that you don't need the reticle, which means that aiming through the optic no longer matters. So all in all, the pistol itself has been great. I mean, some of you guys hate P320s no matter what. I'm telling you, this M18 has been a solid pistol. No issues there. It's got a manual safety if you're so worried about blowing your junk off, so that might make you feel better. But in all reality, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I want to love this gun. And I want to love this particular setup because I was like, yep, this is what the military tested and did all their research on and made sure was good to go when it came to everything they wanted. And it's very clear that a lot of different departments didn't agree on a lot of different things here. So it is what it is. Thought I would bring this to your attention, let you know my thoughts on it. Let me know in the comments below what you think about it. If you think that they could have done something better. And that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.